So just recently, this new Mass Effect series got released. This remastered of the entire trilogy. I haven't picked it up, uh, not because I'm not interested. I actually am. It's just because I know it's going to eat up about 60, 70 hours of my day, of my life. And I'm just terribly, I just don't have time right now, especially with all the projects I have, the Kickstarters I'm running. And the fact that I prefer to play board games with my wife than sink 60 hours into a game like this, even though I have sunk more than that in games like Hard Space Shipbreakers. I think it's because it's an addicting game. Once I start playing Mass Effect, I don't want to stop, and I'll play it for 15 hours in a day, and that's something I don't really have time for. I did play Andromeda. I actually thought it was pretty good. I thought it was too long. I thought they should have cut about 10 hours out of that game because I think it ran for 35, 40 hours, and there was a lot of grinding. But I actually did enjoy it. I actually felt it had a pretty good ending. I liked how it ended. I liked the romantic subplots in the story. So, but that brings up what is considered one of the most short-sighted endings in gaming history. Mass Effect 3's banal ending is an example of a franchise that runs off the rails before arriving at the station. This is not to be confused with the term jumping the shark, associated with the phenomenon when a failing franchise attempts a jarring tonal shift to the dismay and condemnation of what few fans they have left in an attempt to revitalize the brand. Running off the rails occurs when a story or franchise which appears on course to a smooth destination just crashes at the end. This problem concerned me late because of its apparent infection rate. Writers, producers, project directors, and showrunners apparently have taken upon themselves to act capricious. We just saw it with Game of Thrones, although I didn't care. I actually didn't mind the ending of Game of Thrones. I thought it was just rushed. And I don't mean a twist in the narrative that had laid down its groundwork early for a turn of events brilliant and unexpected despite being harsh. I refer to events so callous and irresponsible they serve only to unravel the fabric that a story spent years or even decades trying to weave. Occasionally, meaning unfortunately often, it's the ego of the lead writer imposing an ending he or she considers brave, despite it actually being shit. Mass Effect was only the latest victim, begging me to wish Max von Sydow would just step in for an immediate exorcism on today's modern media. Other good examples of this include the reveal at the end of Enterprise, the nonsensical ending of The Shield, or the greatest crime thrust upon its audience, the final episode of Battlestar Galactica. I dodged the attacks coming at my way. Sure, novels have been known to end badly, but I've seldom read such a situation occurring in a series. Well, except for Stephen King's Dark Tower. But King warned that the ending might anger people. He even offered a disclaimer that if you wanted the happy ending, to read only up to the final chapter, avoiding the epilogue. Reading to the end, you took your chances and discovered the circular nature to the entire saga. Battlestar Galactica refrained from such a warning. He was a show that built up an allegory of religious conflict in its final few seasons, only to nullify that conflict with a deus ex machina, confirming one faith as being correct. This is why Caprica was such an abysmal failure. How can you present a show about the conflict between polytheistic and monotheistic dogmas when you acknowledge the monotheistic faith as correct? This pedantic plot was practically photocopied by the creators of Lost, which revealed the entire series to be a parable of Christian dogma. Now, I won't go into details as to why, unlike Peanut Butter Cup, science fiction and Christian philosophy don't mix, but I'll state that these stories ran off the rails in regards to logic, whether external or internal. At least Mass Effect 3 didn't fall into the pit of religious parody. It only showed its weakness in presenting a formulaic and cliched resolution, which had been done better and more intelligently by writers 50 years ago. It committed the further sin by ignoring past in-game mythology and disregarding the main character's contribution to the overall saga. I theorized that the ending was a place marker imposed by corporate politics until a more satisfying ending could be sold to the masses. But later evidence pointed to my later hypothesis, that of the imposing ego was correct. In the microverse of my personal role-playing games, I've wrapped up several campaigns set in Amethyst. It was 3 games, each running 2 or 3 years, and I feel I've worked that setting over enough. The first campaign ended in a more traditional fantasy route with closure and happy endings. Logos, the sequel, the campaign, which was set 500 years later, ended on a downer with most of the characters dying, but the course of events that would save the planet. Cradle was the most complicated and resonant game I've ever run, and I've been worrying about whether I'd end my story in a way that honored the setting and characters. I know I'm not alone in this. Obviously, we just saw what happened with the Game of Thrones, and George R. R. Martin has publicly criticized both Battlestar Galactica and Lost for their disappointing endings, earning a counter stab by Lost co-creator Damon Lindelof, creating a public War of Worlds back then, more humorous than unsettling. How ironic considering what would happen later. But it does show that most writers worry about how their properties are sent off. They want something worthy of the build-up without sullying what came before. So for your own stories and games, here are some points I'd like to follow. Honor the characters. I believe that a major character's death should mean something and not be done out of spite. When removing major characters from a story, consider the ramifications of it. If a death serves no purpose other than to be shocking, why is it necessary? That's what minor characters are for. Is it just to show that people die? Well, we know that. Is it meant to spur a hero to action? Is it a noble sacrifice? I can go with that. Is it random, meant to show brutal nature of real life? I just watch cable news. Some storytellers believe the end of the story is marked by the death of its main character. There's nothing wrong with offering a happy ending, despite the opinions of some honestly vindictive people. And I'm looking at you, Joss Whedon. Onto the setting. Like Kubrick ordering the destruction of the Discovery models in 2001, even I've been tempted to destroy my own creation. The appeal seems obvious, as the end of the story should be the end for a reason. Something drastic must happen to signify the end. People can be replaced or recast, but changing the setting, like destroying a planet or a ship or disbanding an alliance, can end the story as we know it. But this doesn't always have to happen, and if it does, it doesn't always have to be malicious. People move on, the crisis the story focused around may end, but the fabric of the setting can live on, even though your involvement in it may end. Payoff. I learned this from screenwriting class. It's the practice of introducing an object or plot element early in a story for it to pay off later. It's classic, common, and always welcome. The best example I can remember came from Alex Proyas's Dark City, where a casual line spoken by the villain halfway into the film is paid off in a manner which seals his fate at the end. I endeavor to include such elements in my work. For those reading the story segments in any Amadeus publication, look for the broken watch. By employing payoff, you show your players and your audience that endings aren't covered in your ass hairs, but are connected to ideas introduced early on. It shows you had an idea from the get-go. Avoid unnecessary twists. It's become such an annoying trend in stories that the writer has to inject some unexpected twist in order to maintain interest or keep his audience guessing. Although this works in regards to the payoff point mentioned above, the argument loses ground if the twist makes no sense or has no connection to anything else encountered earlier. Before M. Night Shyamalan's brain dripped from his skull, he had properly injected a surprise twist in 3 successive films. Although not entirely unpredicted, the twists did have their foundation laid early on. Although twists were common in crime stories, they were rarely employed in larger franchises and genre stories. They became prevalent in the last decade, resulting in the abuse by writers with no comprehensive logic. I got to calling this the Poochie ending.
Well, look who's here! Hi, Poochie. You look like you've got something to say. Do you?
Yes, I certainly do.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
Wow, Poochie came from another planet? I guess.
Although this episode was meant to illustrate jumping the shark, I use it to cite the means of Poochie's departure as a sudden plot change, which makes no sense, is never explained, and leaves the audience scratching their heads. It's about legacy. What will people remember? We often hear the saying, any publicity is good publicity. It does have its limits. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. This has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.